Welcome, dear students, to the first virtual class of English. Today we will be doing the first chapter of Hornbill, that is the Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Before starting the chapter, I just want to give you a brief description about the author. Khushwant Singh, his real name was Kushal Singh, was born on 2nd February 1915 and took his last breath on 20th March 2014. He was an Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist, and politician. He is a very well known writer. His experience in the 1947 partition of India inspired him to write Train to Pakistan in 1956. A movie was also made on this novel in 1998, and this particular novel of his became his most well known novel. He was a very fearless journalist and he has written many novels. Let's start with the chapter The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. Before starting the chapter, explaining the chapter, I would like to tell you the theme of the story, that is, what is the story all about. So, this particular chapter is a part of autobiography of Khushwant Singh. In this chapter, he has talked about his bonding with his grandmother and how it went under different changes with the passage of time. He has also drawn a pen portrait of his grandmother. In other words, we can say that this is a beautiful tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives a picture of human relationship, and this is a realistic account. It is a real account of how the grandparents gave all their time, attention, and love to their grandchildren. So, grandparents, all of you will relate with this story, those who are having the grandparents, those who have stayed with the grandparents, and how your relationship with your grandparents have changed with the course of time. You will easily relate with this story. Now, before reading or explaining the chapter, I would tell you that there are some expressions given here. So during the explanation, I will keep on telling you the meaning of these expressions. So please note it down somewhere. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. So from the past 20 years, he has seen his grandmother old, having a wrinkled face. So almost everybody's grandmother is old, and most of them, not everyone is having wrinkled face, but most of them are having wrinkled face because of their age. So since 20 years he is seeing his grandmother like this. She was old and having a wrinkled face. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband. So from the people he had come to know that once when her grandmother was young, she was a very pretty lady, and she even had a husband, because he has not seen his grandfather, though he could not believe that her grandmother was having a husband too. It was really hard for him to believe that, because since 20 years he has seen his grandmother like this. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. So, in the drawing room, his grandfather is no more. So, his portrait is hung there, and he is describing his grandfather, the portrait of his grandfather. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. So, looking at the portrait, he says his grandfather, he looks like though he was not, he may not be, but he looks like a man of 100 years. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. By looking at his face, nobody can make out he would have a husband. He once he had a wife or a children, because he was not that smart. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. So he is looking that much old that nobody can believe that once he had a wife and a children. He looks like a person who can have lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. The thought was almost revolting means it was really very hard for the author to believe that his grandmother was once a young and a pretty lady. He could not believe this because since his childhood, since 20 years, he is seeing his grandmother like this old and wrinkled face. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. So she used to tell her childhood stories. She would to share her childhood stories with him, as your grandparents also share. So you can see a vast difference between the games they used to play and the type of games you play. So the stories which she used to tell, the author never believed those stories. That seemed quite absurd. So those stories appeared to him very ridiculous and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. So he used to consider it not real ones, they all the created stories. So he used to consider it as a stories about the Sikh gurus. She used to always narrate them the stories of the Sikh gurus. So he considered them also one of them. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. So now here he describes his grandmother, her appearance. So she has been a short and a fat and slightly bent. So she was a short and a fat lady, and she was slightly bent because of her age. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. So everywhere on the face she had a crisscross lines, and those were the wrinkles everywhere on the face it could be seen. And looking at her, she never she does not look pretty. So that's why the author says that it was revolting to believe that she was once a pretty lady. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, and he was pretty sure that she always looked like this. Old, so terribly old that could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. So, according to the author, she is already so old that she cannot grow older than this. So, according to him, since he is seeing him, she is like this. So, this is the way she used to be, and she cannot grow more old. Already, she was too much old. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. By looks, she was never a pretty lady, but according to the author, she was beautiful. Beautiful means she physical by pretty means the physical appearance which we see from outside, beautiful from the inner beauty. So from heart she was a beautiful woman. She hobbled about the house, sorry, she hobbled about the house in a spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. So hobbled means since she was very old, so she used to walk with difficulty. So she used to walk in the house in a spotless white. That means she was a widow, so she used to wear a white clothes with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop. So on one hand she used to keep on the waist to balance her old body, and on the other hand the beads of her rosary. Rosary means the mala, so she keeps on saying the prayers on it. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale. Silver locks means her hairs. They were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in audible prayers. So, puckered means wrinkled, and inaudible means which cannot be heard. So, her silver locks, that means her silver hair, were scattered very untidily. It was not tied properly all over her pale, puckered face, wrinkled, pale due to the old age. It has turned into pale yellow color, and her lips constantly, and she used to keep on saying the prayers, and She used to speak so slowly that it could not be heard. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the morning. But yes, she was a beautiful lady. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Now here the author tells us that why her, his grandmother was a beautiful lady. So an expanse of pure white serenity means she was calm, peaceful and serene. He is describing her character. What kind of lady was she? She was a very calm, she was a peaceful and very serene, and she used a serene lady. She is compared to peaceful winter landscape in the mountain. As we see the winter landscape full of covered with snow. So she used to be clad in white clothes, looking pure. White is the symbol of purity. So she used to look pure and very serene. She was always attired in spotless white clothes and had silver hair. She thus presented a picture of pure white serenity, purity. So she is here, the author has compared her with the white landscape in the mountains, which looks, when the mountains are covered with white snow, they look pure, they look white, they look serene. In the same way, his grandmother was a lady who was very calm, composed, serene, always clad in white clothes. She looks pure. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. So now he is describing about his childhood. When he was a small child, the bonding between him and his grandmother was like a very good friends. So why he was left in the village? Because his parents had left him with her, because they have gone to the city, and we were constantly together, and most of the time grandmother and the narrator used to be together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayers in a monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me, in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. So, while getting him ready for the school, while bathing him, she used to enchant the prayers, thinking that if she keep on enchanting those prayers, her grandson will learn that prayer. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. So he loved to listen those prayers, but never thought of learning that. And why he used to listen to her prayers? Because he loved her voice. That's why. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen. So uh, this story uh, is set up before the independence, when the children used to write on wooden slate, then plastered chalks or ink pot and all that. So quite old. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, with which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. So all the things which the author used to require to go to school, she used to pack and give it to him. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. So this was the breakfast of author and his grandmother. Now these days, what you use, you don't eat stale chapati. You like to have bread, butter, egg, etc. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. So the left chapatis, she used to take it to feed those village dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. So she always used to accompany him to the school. First of all, he was a small boy. Secondly, she was interested in going to the school because a temple was attached to the school. So While the child was spending the time in the school, in the meanwhile, she used to spend her time in the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or prayers in chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scripture. So while he is doing the study part, learning the morning prayers, all the alphabets, so that time the grandmother used to sit inside the temple and she used to read the scriptures, good like Guru Granth Sahib. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time, the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. So, while returning, the village dogs used to follow them just to have the food. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. So, finally, when author's parents were settled in city, they called them in the city. That was a turning point in our friendship. So, turning point refers where the author's relationship with his grandmother changes drastically after they moved to the city house. There was a drastic change in the bonding, in the relationship between the grandmother and the grandson. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the street, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. So now he has drawn the contrast between the village life and the city life. Now here she could not accompany him to the school because he used to go to school by school bus. Secondly, there were no street dogs, so she could not feed the dogs like in the village she used to feed. Now, instead of feeding the dogs, she used to feed the sparrows in the house. And now, here the author has been admitted to the English medium school, not like the village school. So that's why you will come to know how the bonding between the relationship between the grandmother and the grandson started changing. As the year rolled by, we saw less of each other. Now, the communication between the author and his grandmother became less. The reason was that the author got busy with his studies, and moreover, she could not teach the lesson which is being taught. She could not help him in any of the ways. So, the communication between them reduced. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. So, for some time, she used to wake him up, get him ready for the school as she used to do in the village. Though she could not help him in his study, but she was very much interested that what is being taught in the English medium school. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. So the author used to share with her what he has learned in school. He used to share some English words with him, that whatever he had learned in science, that is the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and telling her that the world is round. All those things he used to share with her. This made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scripture. So, this very idea really disturbed her a lot, that the children were not taught any scriptures in the school. They were not taught about their religion, about their God. So, she was really, really unhappy with this idea. And secondly, she could not help the narrator with the lessons because she could not understand anything what is being taught in his school. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. So one day he came home and he said now they will be given music lessons in the school. She was very disturbed. Grandmother really became unhappy with the thought that now his grandchild will learn music. To her, music had lewd association. Lewd means it is very, very disrespectful, very indecent thing to learn music. According to her, it is the monopoly of harlots. Harlots means the prostitutes and the beggars. So this, according to her, it is not an honorable thing to learn music. It is not meant for gentlemen. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. Though she didn't say a single word, but through her silence, it could be understood that she was not approving this. She did not like this idea. She rarely talked to me after that. After this incident, the grandmother rarely talked to the grandfather because she was not at all happy with the kind of education he was getting. Rest of the chapter I will continue in my next presentation. Till then, please read the chapter carefully. If you are not able to understand anything, please ask me on my personal WhatsApp number. Till then, bye bye. Take care. Stay safe.